Thank you so much for being here and joining this webinar. So this is going to be all about Jira Service Management for IT teams. I'm super excited to be sharing all of the things that we're going to be talking about. I come from a background of IT myself. I was in help desk and system administrative work for some time. So this topic really hits close to home, especially around Jira, since I'm very involved with like the Atlassian and Jira ecosystem. So I'm super excited to be sharing things that we do for our clients and customers within Jira Service Management, to be sharing all the little tips and tricks, how we set things up within the Jira environments, and how to really get the most out of Jira for your organization. All right, so let's jump in. So transforming Jira for IT service, or for Jira Service Management for IT teams. My name is Josh. If you don't know who I am the CEO of Grid.io. We started the company essentially to help individuals, IT teams, development teams, anyone using Jira to really get the most out of the tool and being able to use it to its full potential and implementing the right feature set, actually getting use out of it, and being able to set it up in the right way, because oftentimes Jira is a really great tool that's very customizable, but some teams just don't use it as effectively or as efficiently as they can. So our whole mission is to really help you thrive with Jira. We worked with a lot of companies like Rain, KPI Solutions, Volkswagen, Fivetran, a lot more. So super excited to be sharing more on IT management. So a couple of things here that we'll be going over. So Blueprint for IT Success. We'll be going over the issue types and request types. That's kind of the first thing that we're going to touch on, because the number one way that individuals reach out to IT teams is either through a form or a portal, sometimes via email. We'll talk a little bit about the difference between the two and which one you should be using. And then we'll be going over the workflows, queues, SLAs, and then some reporting at the very end. And a couple of ways that we've perfected this over time. So we worked with a lot of teams in the Atlassian space and in the Jira space. And we've taken what we've learned from all these different teams, from all the little different implementations, the features, the different customers within each teams, and we've kind of bundled it up into this implementation that we're going to be talking about today. Answers some of the tips and tricks that we've come along the way that really make a big difference within your Jira environment. So identifying those patterns and challenges within those IT teams is something we do anytime that we get to work with a new client or organization. We also have a very big focus on scalability. So anytime we approach a new environment, we always think, will this scale with the organization? Obviously, because teams grow and we don't want to outgrow the tools and the systems that we've built. So scalability is always good to have, and keeping those best practices in mind. All right, so just before we jump in, if you want to stay connected, feel free to scan that QR code on the screen. That's going to sign you up for our newsletter or take you to the sign up for our newsletter. Or you can just go to our website. You can also follow me on LinkedIn. The newsletter is just Jira tips and tricks, all value, no fluff. As much as we can, we try to provide value through the newsletter. So if you wanted to subscribe to that, feel free to scan the QR code and you'll be taken to the form to fill out a form to subscribe to our newsletter. All right, I'll leave that on for another second here just before we jump in. And a couple of key terms to know that I'll be chatting about. So just so everybody's in the loop, I don't know if you are an expert in Jira or if you're still fairly new to Jira. So I just want to make sure that these terms are covered and everybody's in the loop of what these terms are. So JSM is just abbreviated for Jira Service Management. Customer and agent, I'll throw those around as well. That's just different roles and permissions in Jira. A customer is just someone who's submitting requests, and an agent is someone who is typically going to be working on them. So that'll be your internal IT team. Issue type is a categorization of work in Jira. This is sort of in a weird transitionary phase where issue type is kind of changing to work type in Jira. So the terms might be a little bit different depending on which documentation you read, depending on who you're listening to. So just keep in mind, work type and issue type are kind of interchangeable as of right now. Then we have request type, and this is just your customer-facing form or request. So something like, I need help with a problem on my laptop, that's a request type. A workflow, that's going to be steps and transitions to resolve work. So you might have something from open, in progress, and done. The combination of those statuses make up a workflow. SLA, I'm sure everyone's familiar with this one, service level agreement. Assignee, this is a term that Jira uses to identify who's responsible for that particular task that's created. And then the reporter is just the person who created the request. All right, so let's jump into the screen share here. And the first thing I want to cover, again, as I mentioned, is the way that individuals are going to be submitting these requests. Now, why is this so important? Why does it even matter how individuals reach us? So this is probably the most critical part as an IT team to the customer. They need to be able to reach out easily and being able to get a request submitted with the least amount of friction as possible, and have our agents being able to work on those requests as quickly and as effectively as possible is really the goal. So I talked a little bit about email versus a portal, something like this. On a portal, we have our, a few different request types. We also have like a chat with virtual service agent. I'll be diving into that later in the video or in the webinar. I have a couple of exciting things I want to chat with the virtual agent in particular, so stick around for that. But really the two main ways that IT teams are receiving requests are either through a portal like this, where they jump in, fill out a form, customer fills out a form, and then they get that request on the back end. The other way is going to be either via email or like a Teams chat or a Slack chat. So you really want to be moving away from any kind of chat or email tracking for a few reasons. Number one, it's not very scalable. So if you have a lot of teams or a lot of team members in your IT team, it's going to be really hard to keep track of who's doing most of the work, the requests that are coming in, escalations. You're going to have a very difficult time with all the tracking and the metrics and scalability of that kind of a process. It does work if you're like a single IT team or a single member IT team. It's not too much of an issue because you can kind of keep track of things, but regardless, a portal like this is going to be a lot better. And the second reason we want to move away from email is the collection of information. So generally speaking, we want to collect as much info as possible when actually getting a request from our customers. So if a customer has a request for a new laptop, we don't want to just receive an email that says, hey, I need a new laptop, please get one for me. We want to be able to ask certain questions like, okay, why do you need a new laptop? Who's your manager so that we can get it approved? Maybe some more information on like what the laptop actually is without necessarily going through looking it up in our assets manager. So it's really that collection of information that we receive that helps us be able to resolve the request a lot quicker. So rather than getting that email or getting that Slack message or even just a request in the portal with no information, going back and forth with the customer. Some customers are very, very hard to get a hold of too, so this might take days in some cases. We want to collect that information upfront as much as possible and everything relevant to that request. That way, when we're assigning these to agents, they can work on them with all the information that they need. If they do need to reach out to the customer, that's fairly common, but at the very least, we have all the basic information that's needed for the agents to start their work. So that's why we tend to use a portal. A couple of ways that I've seen teams move over to a portal from an email process is kind of implementing this portal as a secondary option. So with Jira, when you implement something like this, you actually get, you can implement email alongside of it. And inside of each email that Jira auto responds or sends notifications about, you're actually going to get a little tag at the bottom of the signature that lets you click on it and takes them directly to the portal. So that's actually a really great way of warming teams up to a portal like this, because once you start doing that and you do it for, say, half a year, everybody's going to know what the portal is, and they've at least at some point seen it. And then at that point, you could start pushing people and saying, hey, please initially request these on the portal, and then eventually just phasing that email out. So that's the most common process I've seen that works very well to get rid of your email supports, especially if you're a larger team. You definitely want to make sure that you have a centralized place of receiving requests and tracking. All right, so now that we have our portal set up, and let's say your team is using it, or maybe you're just diving into this and you're using Jira for the first time, but you already have a portal and your team is using it, I want to go over a couple of things that are best practices here. So number one is not overloading the portal with too many request types. So you can see that I have 4 buckets here, and these 4 buckets contain different request types. So if I go to general request, there's just one option here. If I go to laptops and equipment, I have a couple options here. And within these buckets or within these groups and within these request types, I'm keeping these very limited on purpose. I'm not overloading these with like 30 different request types, 30 different groups, because that would be very complicated for a customer to jump in here and submit a request. So I always tend to look at this through the eyes of a customer when I actually build this out. So for example, if I'm a customer and let's pretend I have an issue with my laptop. If I go to this portal and there's like 30 different groups and all of them are slightly different, laptop hardware issues, laptop software issues, laptop down, laptop approval needed or something, I'm going to be very confused as a customer as to which request I actually need to submit. So keeping these groups very high level and keeping these groups, I would say less than 6 groups in total. 4 to 6 is typically going to be the sweet spot. I think 4 is even better, but if you do have other different groups, you could always add those in, but I would definitely try to keep that under 6. If you need to create an entirely separate portal, if the requests are completely irrelevant to a customer submitting requests for IT help. And then same thing with our request types, keeping these 4 to 6 is typically going to be your sweet spot. Having less than 4 requests per bucket is totally acceptable as well. So just a little tip there, definitely don't overload your customers and think about terminology when you're creating these. So you might have something like software issues and hardware issues, which is super common to see within the IT industry. I actually tend to completely stay away from that terminology. The reason for that is, let's say I have a laptop and I have a problem with my laptop. Maybe I don't have a piece of software installed. So I need Adobe installed on my laptop. Is that a hardware request? Is that a software request? I, as an IT person, would know that is a software request, but as a customer, I might be a little bit confused and submit the wrong request. So that's why I've broken it out into these groups and these specific buckets here. We have found that these types of groups are typically the most straightforward and easy for customers to understand. So general IT help, laptops and equipment. So that's going to be all your hardware related stuff. So anything laptop related can go here. Logins and accounts. Customers know that anything login or account related is going to go here. And employee transitions, specifically for any kind of onboarding, offboarding. That's also fairly common to see with IT. I'm just putting that in its own bucket here. So this is kind of what we've derived to be the best groups. Again, these are very custom to each organization, but this is a really good starting point. So inside of one of these, let's say laptop and equipment, there's a couple of different options. We have broken asset, we have requesting a new asset or a laptop, requesting a new mobile device or peripherals. So again, keeping these very simple, high level and easy to understand is going to be key for our customers to actually find the right request and submit the right request. As soon as they submit the wrong request, you're going to have issues with tracking. You're going to spend more time chasing down and fixing request types. And then on top of that, the fields presented to the customer are going to be incorrect. So you're actually getting the incorrect information submitted. So this part is one of the most critical steps of actually receiving and triaging requests on the back end. One other thing here is general IT help, or sort of like a catch-all bucket, some might call it. I used to be pretty against a catch-all, essentially a catch-all group like this. And the reason being is that if your IT or if your customers tend to go in here and they find an easy way to submit a request, they're going to take that step every single time, especially if it's generalized. So I was pretty against having this up until recently, where the more I worked with clients that we had and the more customers that I've seen inside of IT environments, the goal is to reduce the friction of a person submitting a request or a customer submitting a request. And if we don't have a general bucket for someone to go in here and easily submit some kind of a problem or something that's maybe unrelated to these other items, the harder it is going to be for them to actually receive help from our agents and our team. So it's really a give and take of making sure that your team or your customers don't abuse this. If they do, I would maybe recommend getting rid of this temporarily, having them get used to the other request types, and then bringing this back. Another really great option here is to initially set up a catch-all bucket. And then what we do is we look at the requests that are submitted through the catch-all, and we find the most common ones. We find everything that we need to create a group for or a separate request type, and we make sure that that exists on the portal while getting rid of this catch-all. So we'll leave this up for, say, a few months, and we'll look at every single request that comes in. We'll evaluate whether a new request type needs to be built or if these could be funneled into existing request types, and then we'll actually get rid of this. So a couple of options you have there, but I generally like to have this until it starts getting abused. At that point, if it is getting abused, I would remove it, but most organizations seem to do a pretty good job of this. So diving into request type, let's go ahead and take report broken asset as example. Actually, I'll go ahead and go to the catch-all instead, because that one's going to be a little bit more customized. And the reason we have a very little amount of request types, again, is to not confuse the customer. But how do we also collect enough information for our agents to be able to actually triage this request correctly without adding too many fields? So For example, a catch-all request like this, we might want to understand what the problem is, every single little detail about the problem, as much information as possible. But we don't want to overload the customer with too many fields and too many options and make this form like a 10-minute form to submit. So the way we actually get around that within Jira is we use conditional fields and forms. So for example here, I might have a problem with my device, or it might be system access. So I'll click on system access, and as you can see here, we actually had a few different fields pop up. So the reason for this is when we select a form that's conditional, we get a subsection of fields that show up with that submission. So rather than showing every field for every possible option, we show only what's relevant to the customer for what they're submitting. This reduces drastically the total number of fields that they have to fill out, making it quicker for them to fill out the form. And on top of that, it makes it easier for us agents to be able to receive requests and have all the details that we need. So if I remove system request and add hardware or my device, now we get a different question of what type of device is it. Depending on the device, we get some information on, did you try this? Can you enter the asset tag, etc. If you can imagine like adding all of these fields in here into one form that are not conditional, we'd have like 50 fields in this form. But because we broke it out and made them conditional, makes this form super palatable and easy for customers to see, fill out, and move on. So again, we don't want to overload customers with fields. I can't stress that enough, because the more fields you have, the less likely they are to use this, and they'll just ping you on Slack. So make this as easy as possible for them while collecting as much information as you need without, again, being too annoying or too much friction in this form. So it's a good balance of having enough information versus creating friction for the customer to submit a request. So for this example, I'll add a quick system access request. And then there's a, did you forget your password? Yes, no, but I can't log in. So depending on what's selected here, again, we get more conditional fields. So let's say, no, I can't log in. That's not the issue. Might be having an issue with my CRM. Let's say I can't log into Salesforce. And there's a question here is, are you able to do other work while we fix this? Yes or no? So this is actually pretty critical for a priority matrix framework that we have in the back. That's essentially automated. Depending on what's selected here, it's going to be either expedited, or if a customer can work on something else, we know that it's not as high priority. Oftentimes, these are also broken into severity and impact. That way we know how many people it impacts and how urgent it is for the customer. And then we can define a priority on the back end. This is a little bit of a simpler way of doing that. But the idea here is that we use terminology that's very clear on, are you able to work or not? It's very hard to lie on a question like this versus adding a priority field here, which is going to say, what priority is this? Every customer is going to say it's high priority to get their problem fixed immediately. So phrasing your questions in this way when you ask things related to priority really helps them be able to answer a little bit more accurately and help you understand what is and is not high priority. So let's say yes for this question, and then we're going to summarize a quick line here. So I'll say, I can't access our CRM, says password is incorrect. So you can see here that we also get some suggested articles, which is fairly critical to self-help. And there we go. Whoops, let me go back. I accidentally went to the article. There we go. So we want these articles to show up to essentially support that self-help that we have within our documentation. So if there is any kind of guidance or tutorials that you have on helping issues or helping customers resolve their issues in this way, they're going to be suggested here based on keyword. So as you saw here, when I clicked on it, this isn't relevant to that particular problem, but there is a process here on how to create an Office 365 user. This is a little bit more back-end IT related, but the idea here is that we have these Confluence documents set up for customers to self-help. And maybe while they're typing out this request, they get a suggestion here. They click on the article, they solve their issue, and actually don't need to submit the request, and they could cancel it. There's some reports we could run on the back end that actually help us understand request deflection. So we actually could see how effective our articles are in terms of deflecting requests from actually being submitted. I'll go over that report towards the end, but super critical for actually measuring how effective your articles are. On top of that, these articles actually feed into the virtual service agent, which again, we'll touch on a little bit later, which is super helpful at reducing total requests. But yeah, super critical to have these if you're using Confluence, super easy to integrate. If you're not using Confluence, I would definitely suggest having at least a subsection of your content inside of Confluence for users to reference. That way it could show up in this portal directly. They could very easily jump into these articles and self-help. So our request is filled out. I'm a customer, I'm happy. I have very little fields to fill out. Everything was straightforward. I know that all my problems are gonna get resolved once I submit this. So I'll go ahead and send this in. So once it's sent in, I'll jump into the backend and look at it as if I am an agent. So this is gonna be our submitted page for the customer. Now let's jump into the backend as an agent. So a few things here. We get our request that's submitted with the form, all the information that's filled out, just the conditional fields, which is exactly what we want. And then from here, we go ahead and start working on this request, triaging it, escalating if needed, and resolving it. So your agents will typically jump in here, start going through the workflow, start chatting with the agent if needed. And as I mentioned, we want to collect as much information as possible. That way, I, as an agent, if I am jumping in here to work on this ticket, I have everything I need to actually resolve this request without necessarily needing to keep contacting the customer for more information. Okay, so how do we actually build out these request types and forms? So in our project settings, I'll go to request types first. So we're gonna have our request management. Under that, we're gonna have request types. And we have a few different buckets here. And your most common ones are gonna be service requests and incidents. Developer escalations are a little bit more for customer support and related to like bugs, stories, all that kind of stuff, feature requests. And unassigned is gonna be anything that groups something that you don't have assigned to a particular request type. So I highly recommend grouping into service requests versus incidents. Incidents are typically going to be higher priority because it means something is actually down and either a customer cannot work or some kind of system or infrastructure is down, which means many customers cannot work. So this is always going to be your higher priority item versus a service request, which is essentially just someone requesting something, whether that may be access to new software or that may be access to or like requesting a new piece of hardware. That's all going to be related to service requests. So it's pretty important to understand the definition between those two. You don't have to train your customers, and I highly suggest you don't train your customers on incident versus service requests. That's actually another common mistake that I see made on the portal fairly often. Essentially, IT agents, being IT agents, they would put on the portal as buckets, this is a service request, this is an incident, this is a change request, whatever else you may have. That's definitely a big no-no because customers will never understand the difference between those two and they won't know where to go to submit a request. So again, you want to make it as easy as possible for them to submit that request and flow through that form while also defining these on the back end for your IT team internally. So as an internal IT agent, I could jump in here and I see that if I look for general IT help, that's going to come in as a service request, which is essentially what we just filled out. Versus an incident, I know that that's going to come in as reporting a broken asset or reporting a system problem. So anytime a ticket comes in, I'll take a look at my queue here. I'm going to see these two defined. So I could see that this one here is a service request if I hover over it, this little green icon versus a red one if I have one in here. There we go. This might be a problem. There we go, an incident. So that's going to be an incident. And we could also split these up into different queues, which is really great and help prioritize. So anytime that we have like open incidents, I could look at that queue here and get everything else filtered out. So I know that this queue may be highest priority versus open requests. This is anything that someone's requesting, which may be lower priority. So again, defining these on the back end and understanding them as agents is pretty critical, but making sure that customers don't necessarily need to understand or be trained on that. So back into our request type. We'll be setting up our request types here and attaching a form to these request types. So I'll go to Get IT Help just to show what that one looks like on the back end. You can see here that we're keeping things fairly simple. We pretty much just have a set of instructions. We have a description, a summary, and affected services. All these are hidden on the portal because we're using this form here. So the idea is that we typically have a request type built. We fill in all the metadata, the title, the description, making it easy for customers to understand what they're submitting. And then we attach a form to that. So, and again, the reason we want that form is for the conditional logic. So I can't take affected services and show like change risk based on what's selected for affected services here. I have to first create a form and then attach a form, which is this attached form section here. And then in that form, we could have conditional logic just like shown here. So in order to create a form, all you have to do is go to your form section. And then here you'll either have a list of forms. You could create a form that's a blank form. So I'll go over that really quick just to demo what that might look like. We'll name this form test form for now, keeping things simple. You'll start with a blank template like this. And the nice thing about forms is we could also format and do anything we'd like in here with any kind of elements that we'd like. So start here, and then we might have a first field here. All we have to do is add a field on the top right. We select the type of field that it's going to be. Might be a long text, maybe summary. And then we might have some more text or like a divider that we can add. Then we could add some kind of like an info panel. If you're familiar with Confluence, the editing here is fairly similar. Please enter blah, blah, blah. And we could keep going down with more fields, with more sections, more conditional logic. So we have a lot more flexibility with this form in general than what we have with request types, which is just pulling in a single field with no conditional logic and nothing else. Request types are fine to use if you have a very simple form that you want to use on the portal front end. But I'd mostly recommend having a form for your request types if it's on the portal. That way you could always make changes in the future and make things more complex if you need to. So to add conditional logic to this, all we have to do is add a section. And before we do that, I'll need to make sure that there's a drop down, and I'll add a couple of choices, 1 and 2. So now we have a test drop down, and we have choices 1 and 2. There we go, maybe other as well. Now we could add a section here, and the section we could name it, and then we could show the section either always or conditionally. So if we want a conditional section, we select that, and then we could show it when a field. So right now the only drop-down field or conditional field that we have here is test drop-down. I'll go ahead and select that, and now test drop-down is any of 1 or 2. So let's say I only want to show this section below anytime the number 2 is selected. So now I have number 2. I'll show another paragraph field here. Test 2. So now anytime that 2 is selected, this paragraph field will show up. And then we can go to our preview to actually see how this form is working. So as you can see, this form looks fairly simple. I select number 1, nothing happens. I select number 2, now we get that conditional box that shows up. So you could obviously get a lot more fancy with how you build these out. You could have conditional sections within conditional sections. It could get as complex or as simple as you'd like. Definitely worth using these if you have a lot of fields that you're requesting from your customers. One other side note that I'd recommend here is to attach these to a Jira field. So you could think of a form as kind of a blank sheet of paper that Jira uses to fill out and receive requests to the backend of the ticket. So what do I mean by that? I essentially mean when a request is filled out, the form is attached to a ticket, but the form fields that we're using here are essentially just a PDF that's attached to the ticket. They're not related to any custom fields. Some of them may be system fields if you're relating them, but they're not attached to anything else other than the attachment of the form. So that creates a problem for us because we can't use them in automations. We can't use smart values. We can't map the summary to like the summary of the ticket. So we essentially solve that by linking it to a Jira field. So when we click on a field value here, we could click on the link Jira field, and we could search for a field, whether that's a system field or a custom field within our Jira environment. So I'll search for summary and click on that. Now we can relate summary to the specific field. And anytime this form is submitted, our system field or custom field is updated. And I recommend doing this for all of your fields just because when you do this for your fields, you're going to have a lot easier of a time in the future with your automations and setting up your smart values, all that kind of stuff on the back end. So this form is built out. I'll go ahead and save the changes. From there, you could go to your settings and either apply it to a request type here, or you could go to the request type and apply the form from the request type by selecting the form in the drop-down list. All right, so now we have our request types and our forms, and we have those showing up on our portal. They're grouped into different buckets. Everything looks great. Requests are being submitted and triaged into the backend. Let's say we have our queue set up for incidents, requests. A couple others here are like VIP queue, maybe hardware issues, open software issues, onboarding, offboarding. Those are some good options for queues. So everything's coming in, we're triaging, and we're using Jira effectively. What are some things that we could do after this? So there are a couple of things. Number one is reporting. And the reporting, there is some built-in reports into Jira. So there's this reports tab here. And we have a couple of out-of-box reports that actually do a fairly good job of telling us things like workload, customer satisfaction. Not a lot of data here. Let me see if I could pull in some information. we don't have any information, but once you do, you'll have your reports showing up here. You could also build custom reports here. This is really great for SLA specific reports. You might have some SLAs out of box or that you set up. And the idea here is that you could easily see created versus resolved. You could see expiring SLAs. So this is a really great place to come in and track, see how your team is doing, to see how effective things are running within your IT department, and be able to make changes based on that information. If you do want more advanced reporting and dashboards, there's going to be a dashboard section up here. And this is typically where I go by default. Almost all the reporting I do just tends to be in a dashboard because you have way more flexibility. So you're going to want to create a dashboard and start applying different modules like this into your dashboards to be able to get palatable, easy information for yourself, your stakeholders, and your team. One thing to note here is that the out-of-box experience with dashboards is very, very limited. Almost every single time that I use a dashboard within Jira, I have to pair it with a plugin. The one that I tend to choose, and if I go to the app section here, so I would recommend adding a plugin, and these tend to be fairly affordable. Some are free, so feel free to look into these and see which one might work for you best. But the one that I tend to use most is the custom charts by tempo. This one's really great because it's very visual and easy to set up, but it's also extremely powerful. What do I mean by powerful? I pretty much mean you could report on anything you want. So that'll include any custom field, any system field, any chart type, pie chart, bar chart, line chart. Gives you pretty much every option you could want within your dashboards and gives you a really easy way to create them. So that's my recommendation on using a dashboarding plugin. And I would say it's almost critical to have one if you're doing any kind of robust reporting in Jira. So definitely look into an option for dashboards here. And again, if you want a free option, there are a few here that are fairly good. All right, so jumping back into our IT support project, the next thing that we can do here is setting up a virtual service agent. So this is really great, and this is one of the newer features from Atlassian and Jira. And the idea here is that with our virtual service agent, we could actually have an AI chatbot that helps us resolve requests before they ever hit our queue. So this is really great because not only are we reducing the amount of requests, we're actually helping customers solve them faster. So there are two things here that get you set up for your virtual service agent. Number one is AI answers, and number two is your intents. That's the things I'll cover today. This goes way more in depth, and I'll touch on this a little bit later with some really cool stuff that we have happening in terms of virtual agents. But the general idea is you want to enable your AI answers. That's going to be step one. And what that does is it connects to your knowledge base in Confluence, which we went over earlier on the portal, and it references your knowledge base information to provide answers to the customer. So let's say a customer needs to know, for whatever reason, how to create a Microsoft account. You can have an article that defines exactly how that process is done. And instead of a customer going through, searching for the correct information, trying to find the correct document, finding the right folders and all that, all they have to do is type into the virtual service agent, how do I create a Microsoft agent or a Microsoft user? And what that agent does is it scours your knowledge base and it presents all that information right in front of the agent as simply as possible without ever even going into Confluence, without searching through any kind of information. It does that all in front of you very, very quickly and very easily, saving your customers a ton of time to search through all that. The second thing we have here is intents. Intents are very, very powerful, and this is something that we've been putting a lot of effort into, and it makes a huge difference. The idea here, if I open up one of these intents, is that we build a flow, and when a customer enters an intent flow, we present them with options, we collect information, and in some cases, we actually take action on their behalf to be able to resolve requests. So let's take this one here as an example. This intent is to create a new Jira project. So this is a fairly common one that I receive as a Jira admin, so it's one I built out as an example. So when we start a conversation as a customer with the bot, it's going to match an intent that the customer is looking for. Once the intent is matched, you can do that through training, by the way, through certain phrases like I need access to a Jira project, I want a board created. Depending on these phrases that you're using to train the bot on, you're going to have your intents, which bring you to this flow here. So as an example, this flow essentially offers you a choice. So in some cases, people need a new project. In some cases, they need access to an existing one. So the first thing I clarify is, okay, do you need access to a current project or are you wanting to create a new one? So if they need access to a current project, we essentially change the request type. So we're automatically applying a request type to this intent. And then we're asking for specific information similar to a form, but this is a little bit more efficient. And then we ask for specific information on the project they need access to. Then we let them know, thank you for submitting the request, and we escalate this. So super simple example here. The idea of the bot is we understand the request from the customer. We ask for specific information. We send that information into a ticket, and then we escalate that ticket to a human agent. So that's just one example to actually collect more information and being able to provide essentially an agent with more information to actually do their job better and quicker. Let's take a look at another example where this bot can actually take action, which is definitely the cooler part of this and saves you a lot of tickets in the future. So we'll go back to the offer choices and take the other path. So if we're creating a new project, we're going to ask a follow-up question here. This is a fairly common question that I see. Sometimes people confuse project versus board. So what I'm asking here is, do you need a Jira board created or a Jira project? So instantly you can see that this could be very valuable because we're actually helping define customers what they need. And there's actually some helpful documentation that we could link directly here to help guide the customer even more. So let's say that they do need the project and they select that. We once again change the request type. We go through, we ask for more information. Please provide a name for the project. Maybe add the users who need access to this project. This flow could be as infinite as you'd like. And then we actually run an automation rule. And this automation rule that I built is a fully custom rule that essentially triggers and checks for whether or not the project name is available. If it's available, it continues, builds the project. And once that automation runs, uses a lot of webhooks on the back end, it actually sends a message to the customer and says, your project has been created. And then we actually, instead of escalating, we resolve this request. So this is one example where we actually take an entire flow, and rather than someone or a customer submitting a request, an agent having to jump in and do the work on behalf of the customer, this flow entirely takes care of that and essentially does the work for you without ever needing a request to come in. So that's the idea behind these intents in this bot. There's a lot you could do here. As you could imagine, there's a lot of ways to implement and utilize these. A couple of the actions here that I just kind of went over is to offer a choice, to send a message, to ask for more information. And then the background actions, which actually help take action on behalf of the customers and agents, is to change the request type. And then we could send a web request. This is extremely powerful if you're using third-party applications. We've done a ton of stuff with customers on, for example, onboarding and offboarding, where we automate their entire process. And the web request is essentially one of the biggest pieces that we leverage to do that. And then we could run automation rules directly within Jira, which again are also very powerful and can also have their own web requests included with them. So as you can imagine, there's a lot we can do within this whole system. This is just one simple example of an intent flow. So if you're interested in building this out, I would say dive into your AI answers first, go through your knowledge base, make sure it's set up and you have correct knowledge articles. Just to give this a quick demo, I'd love to show this and how it works. So this is my little testing environment, and the first scenario I brought up that has a Confluence page attached to it was the creation of users in our Microsoft account. So I might type in something like, how do I create a Microsoft account? And this isn't matched to any intents. What this will do is, if it doesn't find an intent, it will go through and find the relevant Confluence article and generate a response for me. So let's see how it does. So I entered the question, gave me a quick greeting, generating a response. So it should give me the response of the process, and it also gives me the referenced article. So as you can see here, as a customer, this will be like life-changing for me because I actually don't have to go through specific, there it is, references. I don't have to go through specific Confluence articles. I don't have to go through and find which article I need. It's all laid out for me here. And then the bot asks, did this resolve your request, yes or no? If you didn't resolve your request, that's when it can escalate to an agent and say, okay, let's get you over to a human agent. If it did, it's going to go ahead and just close this out. And it asks for a quick rating. This rating is also pretty great to track the helpfulness of this bot itself, and you could run reports on this later. So that's just one quick example using the Confluence articles. Let's try one more with the intent that we built out. So in this case, I'll run a prompt that says, I need to create a new Jira project. And maybe I'm a customer that's not super Jira savvy, and maybe I just need a new project or a project that's already existing that I need access to. So I'm going to run through that flow. And now we get our first question is, are you looking for setting up a new Jira project? Might need to change the terminology on that. I'll click on yes, which brings me into that intent. So that's the intent that we have. This is the first question that we have. So do you need access to a current Jira project, or do you want to create a new project? So in this case, I'll get access to an existing one. Maybe I'm correcting my answer here, making sure that I'm guided in the correct way. Now it says, please provide me the name or the key of the Jira project you need access to. I'll just say dev project. And what it's going to do is update the ticket information, the request type, the fields in that ticket, and then it automatically creates and generates a ticket for me and lets me know that this has been created, and an agent will be jumping in and getting this access granted shortly. It also gives me the link directly to this request. So again, the idea here is that we collect more information if an agent does have to get in and actually support this request. But ultimately, the goal is that we deflect as many as we can and help the bot be able to solve the requests for us. So super cool new feature. It's still in beta, so definitely test it out very thoroughly before going live within your environment. But we have seen this work with clients fairly well so far and reduce a pretty drastic amount of total tickets within their environment. So definitely something to take a look at if you are interested. All right, let's go back to our slides here. So before I jump into questions, feel free to start dropping those down. There is a questions panel on the bottom, just so that you can click the little question icon, add your question there, and I'll go based off of that. And those questions, you could also upvote other people's questions to make sure that I answer the most questions that are the most relevant. So if you click on that little icon on the bottom right, type in your question there or upvote other individuals' questions, that would help me out. So feel free to start doing that now. I'll start answering them in a second. So a couple of things with the Jira virtual agent. Essentially, we already went over this, but it replies, it can take action. When it's done right, it could wipe out 30 to 50% of your daily ticket volume. We've seen this happen with a few other clients in the past. So super critical to get this running right. Most teams kind of just turn it on and never actually set it up in the correct way. What I mean by that is essentially they just use the AI answers without any intents, whereas you should be spending most of your time actually curating and creating the best intents possible. So we're actually working on a to Z playbook on getting these intents right and getting the agent set up to actually make this super effective. So this whole training that we're putting together, this whole little mini course that we're putting together, essentially shows you how to get your virtual agent set up, covers all of your AI answers, intents, flows, hands-off, and optimizations. It's based on real environments that we've worked with and teams that we've worked with in the past. And it's designed to reduce ticket load today, not in the future. So we're doing our best to actually take a look at your current ticket volume within that course and being able to deflect as much tickets as we can for your team. So we're actually in the process of creating this right now. And I'm curious about if you're interested at all in something like this. You could fill out the form that we have on the screen. I'll also throw up a quick link here that you can click directly. So I'll show this as a notification. It should be showing up on the bottom left. You could click it there. So if you click this and fill out the form, if you're interested in this, we'll give you early access whenever it's done. So super happy to facilitate and help in any way we can with getting these virtual agents set up for you. All we need to know is a few basic questions, and if you are or aren't interested in this kind of a training. So if you are, just scan the QR code or click the link on the bottom left. Fill out a super quick, short form. This should be going live within the next couple of weeks. We're fairly close to actually getting this thing done, and we're trying to make it as valuable, as relevant as possible. All right. Yeah, again, if you need that QR code, feel free to stick around till the end. I'll show that QR code one more time. So let's go ahead and jump into some questions. All right, so we got a few coming in here. Is it possible to edit the font, size, color type of the field labels? So not the field labels, but if you are looking at your, let me pull up the back end here. So if you're looking at your forms, you have a couple of options with things like headers, formatting. So as I showed already, I'll go to my test form. And then in here we have our summary and all that. And then we could also add like other fields here. So test heading. I'll go ahead and select this, and then in here I can make it a heading 1. I can make it bigger, smaller, italicized, underlined. So there are some formatting options. I could also change the color of this. I don't believe font is one of those, but as you can see, we do have some other options here that help us be able to get as deep as we need to within a form. I wouldn't go too crazy with this and make it super stylized. You really want a straightforward form that customers can easily fill out. All right, so next question we have here is, can we report based on the data entered in the form that customer submits? Yes, so essentially the form is tied to a request type. The request type and issue types are linked together, and those can both be reported on whether in the dashboard or just in the general reporting section. So my recommendation there would be just build out a dashboard. You'll probably need a plugin to make it mostly relevant. But I would definitely focus on building out a dashboard for all of your requests that come in. And then you could get a little bit more specific with like total request counts, how many were submitted in the last week or month, etc. Okay. What is the best practice to use JSM for submission, bugs, and let teams manage and track the related work in Jira? Can I ensure both projects are aligned? So I'm guessing this is more related to like a development team bugs. And that is actually a fairly common thing, way to implement Jira Service Management. It's to have a front-end fixing portal for customers to submit bugs and features. I know this is a little bit more focused on IT, but that is 100% possible. And the idea behind that is what we do is create a way of reporting a way to pull over requests from JSM to Jira. So whenever a bug is submitted, we could either auto pull or manually pull or pull based on the workflow. So if we have like a workflow that says send to development, that could push bugs and feature requests over to that development team. So it's a super common way to use JSM as your front end for your customers, and you have a developer project in the back end that they use to pull over requests. That's typically the way I'd go about it. There's a lot more I could go in depth, but hopefully that answers your question. My clients would have different portal requirements. I am new to Jira Service Management, assuming I can host more than one portal. Can you recommend articles on how to private label portals specific to clients? So I could show you what the portals look like here within Jira on the portal view. If I go to the Help Center, we do have the ability to have different projects here, as you can see, and I could show more portals sort of like this. The idea here is that you're not necessarily using different portals for different customers. It's really for different departments. So if you have like an IT team or HR team or engineering team, facilities, that's the general idea of how these are set up. Now, that being said, you can have these for specific teams. You can lock these out for specific customers. It's totally feasible to do. But I would say that most customers are going to tend to be using a portal, or most teams are going to be using a portal for all your customers. And then you could also lock down specific issue types. So if I go into like laptops and requests, or maybe employee transitions, this one's going to be a little bit more relevant, but I could lock down employee offboarding to only HR folk. So if you had like customers that you only wanted to see certain request type, you could actually lock these issue types down individually. So that's kind of your option one. Option two is just to create a separate project, which I probably wouldn't recommend. And option three is probably going to be the most viable if you really, really specifically need a custom branded portal with all custom information and all that. You can use a plugin. There's one called Refined. There's a few others that do a pretty good job of that. Let me see if I could find some here. So I just go to the apps and search for portal, and then you're going to come across a few here. So there's some portal extensions, maybe even portal theme would be a better search term. So we have Refined. This is a very popular one. Theme extensions. This will let you do a lot more with the portal itself. So if you're looking for something a lot more customized, this is probably the way I'd go. Can you customize the fields in the form for tickets created via Teams? So Teams is a little bit more limited in terms of what it can present. What I would recommend for Teams is actually just using the virtual agent, just because the forms aren't represented on the Teams app. Unfortunately, I think Slack does a better job of the way they've actually implemented the app, but within Teams, you're only limited to fields within the request type, and unfortunately not forms as of right now. That may change in the future, but for now, the alternative that I found is just use the virtual bot. That's been the best solution. And then using the virtual bot, you can essentially just guide the end users. I don't have the bot open, but essentially you could guide the end users to the request types that you're looking for and help resolve those answers and questions there. Can we link form questions to asset object custom fields? Yes, 100% you can. That's also a very common thing to do. For example, if you're linking assets to individuals and team members or customers, you could actually have them, when they go to the portal and they have, let's say, a hardware issue, you can have a drop down there that shows only their assets. So the idea is that I'm going to, as a customer, submit a problem about a piece of hardware that I have. If it's stored in assets, I could actually curate that drop down just for that customer to show only my laptop, only my monitor, only my peripherals, like whatever else. That way I could choose from my own list of assets, or maybe my phone included in there, and specify which one I'm actually having trouble with. So you can 100% do that, and it is a pretty great way of utilizing the assets, especially as an IT team. All right, any other questions? I think I got most of them in the questions panel. Let's see here. I don't know if any are popping up. If you have any other questions, feel free to submit them while I'm still here. We have a couple more minutes left here. One more time, I'll go over this, or I'll bring up the slide for the early access to the training. Again, if you want access to this, feel free to scan the QR code or just hit the link that I'm going to throw up on the screen here in a second. So again, hit this link for Virtual Agent Accelerator, fill out the form, you'll get early access as soon as this training goes live. So if you're interested in it at all, if you want to reduce your ticket count, feel free to click that, submit the form. We'll reach out to you as soon as this drops. So definitely do that sooner rather than later so that we know who's going to be interested in it and how much effort we're going to be putting into building it out and providing this for you. All right, looks like another question came in. Are those two last issue types custom or possibly an update we haven't had applied to our instance? Yeah, good question, actually. Let me share my screen. I think I know what you're talking about. So I'm guessing you're referencing, no. I'm guessing you're referencing the request types here for developer escalations and unassigned. It is possible you may not have your environment updated yet. That is fairly common with Jira and Atlassian. They roll out updates that are very staggered. Some people get updates months later. My hunch here is that you're just looking at a different project though. So when you go to create a new project, and if we look at service management, we have a ton of different templates and options here. And depending on what you select, you're going to have a different feature set. So I would look here if you're creating a new project and make sure you're selecting the correct one that's relevant to you. And then the other thing is you could go into the features tab, and I believe that's actually in here. So I can toggle off developer escalations, and that'll actually disappear. So most likely you could just go into the features tab, toggle those on, toggle them off. There's a couple of really common ones for IT here, like problem and change management. Same thing with post-incident review. So if you're interested in any of those, just toggle them on, and they should show up for you in this list here. All right. I would like to have conditional questions on my form, but am I limited in the number of options to select from? For example, if the customer enters United States, I would like USA to appear in another field in the form. I don't know if you're asking if we're trying, my question is, I guess, if you're asking to show the field multiple times, I think that would make it redundant, but you're not limited in the total number of options to select from. I will say that. I would be careful with how many options you are listing within your forms, just because the more options you have, the harder it is for a customer to fill out. But you can run automations on the back end if you need to for the agents to be able to have multiple fields filled out with the same value, if that's what you're looking to do. But in terms of form fields, you could pretty much add as many as you'd like. And I would tend to keep that list a little bit shorter unless you're using like a search option with that field. All right. Yeah, I will leave this on up here. If there's one more question. Add your questions now because we are coming to the top of the hour if you have any. Is it possible for a customer in Jira Service Management to add a flexible table, add or remove rows while submitting service requests? Not that I know of right now. You can build out a table within the form itself, like a slightly more basic table. We've done that before. We can show conditional tables or maybe table sections but we can't change the values or informations of that table, at least as of yet, within the form itself on the portal. So I hope that answers your question. I would say yes, there are some workarounds you can implement. I don't know that I would suggest doing so. We've done so in the past for clients that have had specific requirements, but otherwise I would probably say, generally speaking, I would try not to implement that unless you absolutely have to. All right, thanks everybody for joining this session. I'll go ahead and throw up the link one more time in case you're interested in checking out the early access to our virtual agent training to reduce your ticket count. Other than that, feel free to reach out to us or myself directly. You could find me on LinkedIn. You could find our YouTube channel if you want to dig into more specific and nitty-gritty subjects. So feel free to dive in there. And otherwise, thanks for jumping on.